Today is Yevamos Yud Ches. We are starting 24 lines from the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. We have TALMUD TORAH sponsorship today by Leah Sol in honor of Rabbi Silber for his amazing leadership, learning, enthusiasm, and warmth. Also in honor of all who organized beautiful, meaningful, and emotional groundbreaking ceremony and a week of learning sponsorship by Paul and Kathy Pollack and Mary of Paul's grandmother, Dinah Bas Rav Dov Zol. Sam, come on up. You can sit next to me. It's all right. Bring another chair. So a nakuda, a note on yesterday's daf. We're flying through the daf Yomi at, it's Kigaz Kishvanaufa. It's very fast. But yesterday we mentioned the 10 tribes got lost, and that men from the 10 tribes married non-Jewish women. And so if there's a guy you think might be from the 10 tribes, if you don't know he's Jewish, you assume he's not Jewish. However, you should know there's a problem. Well, there's not really a problem. There are other sources. And if you remember, in Megillah Yud Daled, this is like 2 months ago and change. So you probably don't, God willing, you remember a little bit of Megillah. Megillah Yud Daled, the king went to Huldah the Neviah, Huldah the prophetess, to get a prophecy. So where was Yirmiyah? Yirmiyah was the senior prophet. Why did he go to Huldah? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yirmiyah lo hava hazam. Yirmiyah wasn't in Yerushalayim. Shahalach lachazir aseres shvatim. Yirmiyah went out to return the 10 lost tribes. And this was, about 50 years before the first Churban Abayis. Some of the 10 lost tribes were returned by Yirmiyah. The Gemara brings proofs. They still had Shemitah and Yovel because they had some members of the 10 tribes along with the 2 tribes of Binyamin and Yehuda in the south, and that the king of Yehuda actually ruled over members of the 10 tribes in the north during the time of Yirmiyah and Huldah. This is Megillah Yud Dalet Amud Beis. I'm not making this up, Rabbi Sai. What we discussed yesterday was there were certain cities in Syria, in Bavel, where it was known that some members of the 10 tribes had settled there and then had become intermarried. So those people were known to be not Jewish, but some of the 10 lost tribes were returned to Eretz Yisrael and became part of the kingdom again in the days of Yirmiyah. So if you say to yourself, guys, you say, I'm not a Kohen, I'm not a Levi, I must be a Yehuda. Nothing wrong with being a Yehudi, nothing wrong with Judah. But you could be from the other 10 tribes also. There is that possibility because Yirmiyah did return some of them. And we know there are other times when Jews have been lost and then found, and they were really halachically Jewish. There was a bit of a fight over it, but we recall the Ethiopian Jews. And there was a dispute in halacha. We said, well, they're probably Jewish, but maybe they should get a conversion because of the suffix that maybe there are shitas that maybe we're not so sure. And there's a famous Maisa. I don't know if it's famous. We're going to make it famous right now. There's a Maisa by Rav Shlomo Aviner. Who's heard of him? We've heard of him. We've heard of Rav Aviner. And he had a Talmud who was a Kohen. And the Talmud who was a Kohen wanted to marry an Ethiopian girl. Okay. So that's possible. So Rav Aviner said, sure, I think it's mutter, I think it's fine. But there are shitas who say that all the Ethiopians should get a conversion, should get a gerus, just because of the suffix. And of course, a ger can't marry a Kohen, so it kind of throws a wrench in it. He says, why are you dating an Ethiopian girl? He says, I don't see your skin color. I love her. I appreciate her. She has good mitos. So Rav Aviner, he went to look for a heter. He said, I want to be mater. And he got a note. And the note said, a Kohen can marry an Ethiopian. There's no problem. And their sons are still Kohanim. Signed, Be'ahava Rabbah, Rav Ovadia Yosef. So it wasn't just, the Chumrah and the Pilpul and the Lumdus. It was Be'ahava Rabbah. It was with great love. This Kohen did not see the skin color of the Kala that he wanted to marry. And with great love, we were mater the Ethiopians. There were many proofs. Rav Ovadia the Shitaso brought many proofs to prove, without a doubt, they were really Jewish. They were not like these 10 lost tribes in certain cities of Bavel where they really were not Jewish. They were not like the members of the 10 lost tribes returned by Yirmiyahu, the prophet, earlier on before the Churban, that were really, the 10 tribes, they were really Jewish. So that's a note on yesterday's daf that we're flying through. But let's pick it up on 17b, 24 lines from the bottom. We've just been discussing brothers. It's interesting to note that we tried to prove Achim by Avraham and Lot, and they're not really Davka Achim, they're nephew and uncle. So it's sort of a smach here. Maybe it's a support for the fact that the first Yibam we saw was who? Who was the first Yibam in the Tanakh? Yehuda and Tamar. And that wasn't brothers, that was the father. And then later we see a Yibam with non-brothers, with Ruth and Boaz also. So maybe it's a smach that achim could also mean kin. We don't paskin like that, but maybe they relied on that. It's TORAH, and I have to do more research. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. Let's pick up Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, 24 lines in the bottom of Yudzayin. Shomeres Yavam, a woman awaiting Yibam. She's the widow, Shemesa, but she passed away. Mutter Be'ima, the brother who would have been the Yavam, can marry her mother. Alma Kesavar Ein Zika. So we see Rav Huna holds, there's no Zika. Now the Rashi explains, Ein Zika, there is a Zika, but Zika Sivimto Shemeta, the Zika of his Yevama that dies, Lo Alima Lemehe Vekaruz. It's not strong enough to make them quasi-married. It's not strong enough to make Arayos, to make her mother an Erva. If it was like they were really married, if the Zika had the power to make them like they're really married, then even after this woman died, the widow died, the brother couldn't marry her mother. A man can never marry a woman and his mother, woman and his daughter. I mean, that's like the first Mishnah. It's worse than the first Mishnah, because first Mishnah is Karis. This is a Sreifa. It's a Chayiv Mises Bezdin. It's bad. So that would be impossible. So we see he holds Ein Zika. There's not a strong connection there. I know yesterday the Rav said Zeka. Now it's interesting. Zeka, some, is potato. And an observation to make is, I believe the Art Scroll says Zika, but it doesn't really matter. But it's something to be aware of, that the Art Scroll transliterates the Hebrew, and it's beautiful. And you can run through, you can do a Chazar really quick using the Art Scroll with the vowels. You're not stumbling over the Aramaic, and that's a mila. It's humongous, but at the same time, kind of, if we all rely on it, we lose sort of the local dialect. But some yeshivas say Zika, some say Zeka. There's other pronunciations. That it is Torah Shabbat Peh at the end of the day, and there are some variations in pronunciation. But I'll say Zika, that's what my rabbi said. Who knows how to say chameleon in Ivrit, in Hebrew? You guys never been to the zoo in Yerushalayim? A chameleon in Ivrit is a zikit. Zikit. Zika, zikit. What is the connection? A chameleon, Hashem created with the amazing ability to stick out its tongue and grab its bugs, grab its food. The Zika is a bond between the Yavam and the Yevama that they have to act on. It kind of pulls him in. It pulls him in to do a Yibam or Chalitza. Zikukaso means like it's required. He's pulled in. He's obligated to do something. So it's like a pulling him in, like the tongue of the chameleon, pulling him in to do something to take care of this widow. So Zika, Zikit. Abosa, you will never look at a chameleon the same way, because every time you see a chameleon, you'll think, oh, Zikit, Zika, Yevamos Yudches. So I've changed your life forever for the better, God willing. So that's Zika. And Rav Huna says it's not strong enough to knock out the mother of the widow from consideration for marriage after the widow herself passes away. And Zika. So why doesn't Rav Huna just tell us? The halacha is like the one who says there's no Zika, there's no strong Zika. Everyone says there is some kind of Zika, some kind of connection, but it's not strong enough to be like Arusa, like Knusa, and so therefore it's not a problem with erva of the mother. If he had told you this, simply Ein Zika Havamino Havanimili betray. That's when there's two brothers. So you understand, if there's two different brothers and one widow, well, I don't know, is Reuven going to do Yibam? Is Shimon going to do the Yibam? Who's going to do it? But one man himself can say, maybe it's not my obligation, so I don't have a strong connection there. Aval Bachad Yesh Zika, but when there's one, we should say there's Zika. The Rashi explains the Vadai Ole Ramya, that he's required. He's like being pulled in, like the tongue of the Ziki, the tongue of the chameleon. A Madamya Kanusa. So it's more like a Kanusa. So it's more like the widow, the Shomeres Yavam, is in a sense really strongly attached to them. They haven't done the Yibam yet. They're not really married yet, but there's such an obligation there. They're so strongly attached that even after that woman dies, he can't marry her mother because it was like an erva. Why doesn't Rav Huna tell us? The halacha is there's no Zika, even one brother. We would think that chumrah is even when she's still alive. We think even when she's alive, he could marry. If he says there's no Zika at all, no connection, then even though there's this girl waiting Yibam or Chalitza from him, he could go ahead and marry your mother, and he would say, ain't Zika. There's no Zika doing at all. Kamash Milan, there's a shtickle Zika. That Zika is powerful enough, according to Rav Huna, they would have to wait until the widow dies before marrying her mother, but after she dies, there's no more Zika at all. So there is a little bit of Zika, according to Rav Huna. You don't want him to go ahead and marry the mother of the widow, because then there's no chance to do Yibam, because then he's married to a woman who's an erva to the widow, he can't do Yibam on the widow. You're mevatel the mitzvah of doing Yibam. Yeah, she could need a chalitza, but you're mevatel the chance to actually do a Yibam. It's not, we're going to see in the Mishnah later. This Mishnah is actually on Mem Tes. It's like I said on Shabbos, Rabbi say, we are seeing concepts, and we're going to see more of the concepts later. So we're going to see this again on Mem Tes. You're going to say, oh yeah, I remember this from Yud Zayin. This is familiar, and you're going to be building a bigger tzura, a bigger, fuller picture in your head. It's like when you build a puzzle, and you start around the edges. You find the corners, you find the edges, and you're just trying to get things into place on the table, get things into place in your mind, and then later on, when we come back to it, you'll see more of the picture, more of the puzzle is done. This is what we're building in our mind. We're building the puzzle that is Yevamos. We're going to see this later. Tznan Yevimta Shemesa. His Yevama passed away. Mutter bechoso. You can go ahead and marry her sister. So make a diak bechosa in beimalo. So it's not like Rav Huna. You could marry her sister after the widow dies, but not her mother. Remember, the sister is the only erayos that changes after the sister passes away. A man can marry her other sister, the wife's sister, but not while she's alive. The other ones don't change. It doesn't change if someone passed away. It doesn't make it mutter to marry the mother. Lo, who would din the filo v'ima? No, that Mishnah is not teaching that the mother is aser, not like Rav Huna. It says even the mother can marry after the shomeres yavam, the widow, dies. I did the ton the reisha ishto shemesem mutter bechosa, but the reisha that Mishnah says if she was a real wife, not a yavama, not a shomeres yavam, but an actual bona fide wife who passed away, you can marry the sister bechosa in the ima lo, but never the mother. That doesn't change after death. The Havila Isur the Raisa, that's also the Raisa. Tananami Seifa, Mutter Bechoso. So it teaches in the Seifa that by the Shemeres Yavam, he could go ahead and marry her sister, but it's Huadin the mother also. Yehuda Mar Shemeres Yavam Shemesa, Asur Be'ima. So Rav Yehuda disagrees with Rav Huna. Rav Yehuda says, a girl awaiting Yibam and she dies, you can't, not you, but Ruvain can't marry her mother. Alma Kazavar Yesh Zika. So he holds Yesh Zika in the sense that there's a strong Zika. That Zika is like Kanusa. Zika is like a quasi-marriage. They haven't done Yibam yet. They haven't done anything yet, but because he's obligated to take care of this girl, he has an erva status to her mother. And even after this girl dies, the widow, he can't marry her mother permanently. That's Rav Yehuda. And similarly, we're going to analyze. Why didn't you just tell us Yesh Zika? Why do you have to tell us about the mother? Why don't you just tell us Yesh Zika? There's a strong Zika between the Yavam, the man, the brother who's surviving, and the Yavama, the widow who's awaiting Yibam. We would say that's only when one brother. There's only a strong Zika with one brother. Of all betray, if there's two brothers, ain't Zika. The Zika is not so strong because each brother can say, listen, I'll let my other brother do it. I'm not obligated personally, so I go ahead and marry the girl's mother. But he has a machlokus even when there's two. Ela'i amar hachi hava amina top of Yod Ches mechayim. You would say when she's alive, you'd say yeah, the Zika is strong enough that when the widow is still alive, then one of the brothers can't marry her mother because it's a quasi erva through Zika. Avala achar misa, but after the Yavama, the widow dies, he could go ahead and marry your mother because paka lo Zika. The Zika has pakad off. It's popped off. It's gone. Kamash v'lan. The Zika b'chdei loy paka. We learn from here that Zika by itself does not just fly away. There's an amazing Gemara. We're going to see a little bit of it later, talking about Hafaris Nadarim. Remember, Hataris Nadarim, we do Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, we're Matir Neder with a Bezdin. Hafaris Nadarim is a father or a husband can mefer neder of the wife or the daughter when it interferes with regular family life. You understand, if someone's wife says, I'm never going to go eat at the neighbor's again, they burn the food, whatever it was, that might interfere with your family's relationship with the neighbor, so the husband has the right to be mefer that neder. There's a Gemara in the Darim, Ayin Dolid, Shemeris Yavam, Bein LeYavam Echad, Bein LeShnei Yivmin. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yafir, that the brother, the surviving brother, can mefer neder, which is a deraisa power, of the widow who's waiting for Yibum. They're not married yet. But you see, Zika, that's the power of Zika. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, le'echad avolo l'shnaim. If there's one brother, he can be mefer neder to the widow, because for sure, the Zika is strong, he has to do something to her, whether it's chalitza or yibum, so he has the right to be made for her neder. She might take some sort of neder that will make the relationship be a no-go, so he has that Zika, gives him the power to be made for neder. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo le'echad lo l'shnaim. Rabbi Akiva says, no, not one, not two. So we see he holds Zika is even weaker, even with one brother, even two brothers. There's no power of Mefer Neder by the surviving brother to the widow. But this is really interesting because the Mishnah here explains their logic. Nedarim ayin dalid. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, ma im isha shekanahu la'atzmo. He's making a kal v'chomer. A man's wife that he was kona, he chose the wife for himself. Or you made for the Torah gives him the power to be made for her neder, under her neder. Isha shehikno lo min hashamayim, a wife that was given to him min hashamayim when his brother passed away. That's the Yevama. Eino din should be kal v'chomer sheyafar nedereya. The Torah is also given the power to be made for neder. Amar Rabbi Akiva, law. Rabbi Akiva says not good kal v'chomer. Im amrad be'isha. You're telling me his own wife, Shekanu Lasmo, he chose her. Laman Hashem, he chose this woman. He should have the power to make for neder there. And no one else had any power over her. There was never another brother who had Nedarim power on her to deal with her Nedarim. Tomer Be'isha, Shehignalim and Shemaim, you're going to tell me the same rule applies to a woman that he never chose her. He didn't want his brother to die. It was Min Shemaim. His brother passed away without children, and now it's a sad thing. He has to do the mitzvah of Yibam. But it's sad in a sense. He lost his brother to do it. And his brother had Mefer power over also. Rabbi Akiva says, so no, he shouldn't have power of Fars Nadarim. Akiva, the Recha b'shnei Yivnin, Ma'ata Meishiv. He says, I agree with you by two. Ma'ata Meishiv al but what about one? If there's only one brother, he has to do something. Whether it's Chalitz or Yivim, he has to do something. He has an obligation here. Amar lo Eini Yevama Gemura. He says the Yevama is not Gemura, not completely his wife. Rashi explains not Kanusa, there's not the same penalty. If she was a married woman and she went out with another man, there would be a death penalty. But here she's quasi-married. She's not really married. There's a Zika, but it's not so strong as to be a real wife. He says not the same level, Rabbi Yeshua says. Then the Gemara in Nadarim says, Rabbi Akiva Savar, Ein Zika. It's a Zika thing. They're arguing over the power of Zika and if that has an effect deraisa. So you see this Zika, this chameleon, it's not just a power derabanan, it's not just an asmachta, there's a real machlokas tanaim if this has a power deraisa. So that's Zika, that's the chameleon. This Gemara reminds us, Rabbi sides, a quick chazara. Isha shehikna lo min hashamayim, a woman that was given to him in hashamayim versus a woman he chose himself not so long ago. We had a Gemara in Moed Katan, and it's one of our favorite Gemaras in Moed Katan about could you get engaged on Chol Moed? Yeah. So Amar Shmuel Muter la'aris isha b'chol Moed Shema Yekadmenu Acher. You could get engaged to a woman, Mamish Kedushin Erison on Chol Moed, because somebody else might grab her. Remember, this is Moed Katan Yud Ches Amud Beis. This is a famous Gemara. This is your homework. Moed Katan Yud Ches Amud Beis. Go ahead and get engaged because someone else might grab her. They say, what are you talking about? Don't we have a Basher? Don't we have like the one, Min Hashamayim, the ordained Shidduch, the right woman for the right man? They say, yeah, that's kind of true. But Shema Yekabin Achar Barachamim, someone else might pray for her. And his prayers might be answered. Or he might pray for her and be so lovesick, so crazy about her that he comes to like really be infatuated and really cause spiritual problems, health problems to himself. So this is the more nuanced approach to Basheret. And we brought the Rambam when we talked about this Gemara that the Rambam says by choosing a wife, it's not, I'm not saying that Rambam says no Basheret, but basically he says there's free will. He says, and you make your choices and you weigh your options and you make your choices and you don't rely on the fact that, oh, there's the one out there, I just have to wait. He says, no, you don't wait. You develop yourself, you work on yourself, and you make the right choices in life. So that's Isha Sheknul Min Hashamayim, that's Mefer Neder by Shemeres Yavam, and now we are on the second line of Yud Ches at the top. Leima Messiah, let's say this supports Rav Yehuda, that there's a strong Zika. Yevimta, Shemesa Mutter Bechoso, the widow died, he can go ahead and marry your sister. Bechoso in Be'imalo, so the sister yes, the mother no. Remember we brought this Gemara, this is the one, the Mishnah and Mem test later on, building the puzzle. Even the mother he can marry after the widow dies. I did tell the Reisha Ishto Shemeta Mutter Bechoto Davka Bechoso Aval Be'ima Lo. But if it was a real wife, a 100% deraisa wife, not just a widow waiting for Yibam, then if the sister dies, he could marry the other sister, but never the mother. That doesn't change after the death of one of the women. Tahaviles or deraisa because it's deraisa. Tam nami seifa muter bechosa. So when it talks about a yavam and a yavama, So it uses the same symmetrical styling as the Reish, as the beginning of the Mishnah by a real wife. Rav Huna attacks the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Barchia also, but Maimar. What did they do in Maimar? Now remember, Maimar is a rabbinical kedushin in a sense. It's not a kedushin deraisa, but it's a rabbinical. He gives her a ring, he gives her some jewelry, he says, we're going to do a yibum. Let's call the caterer and get a hall and have him make a party, So he does Maimar, but then Nebuch dies. Shniach choleset lo miti bemet. So the case was, so Ruvain passed away without children. Ruvain's widow, Rachel, is now falling to Shimon. And Shimon does a mamar. He didn't do yibum yet. But he did the mamar. He gave her a ring. He said, we're going to get together and do a yibum. Fine, great. But then Nebuch, he died before he could do the yibum. Shniach choletzes l'mibemes. His own widow, Shimon's own pre-existing wife, needs a chalitza, but can't be taken in yibum, because she was quasi-related through Zika to the widow of Ruvain, the first brother. Taima da'avad b'maimar. Now this is because Shimon did a maimar on the widow of Ruvain, and the maimar, we're going to see, reinforces the power of Zika. Not only is it an obligation, but the brother is saying, I will act on the obligation. I will step up and do the yibum. Ha'lova b'maimar, but if he hadn't done the maimar, the Gemara is medayik, shniya nama yibumi yabba. The second girl, Shimon's own widow, she could do yibum to the third brother, to Levi. And this is the case in our Mishnah. Levi was not alive at the same time as Ruvain, the original brother. So if we say that Ruvain's widow, through Zika plus Maimar, becomes a co-wife, a quasi-co-wife, to Shimon's wife, then Levi can't take Shimon's pre-existing original wife in Yibum because she was this quasi-co-wife to Ruvain's widow, and Reuven was never in the same world with Levi. If you're going to tell me there is a Zika, a strong Zika, a very connecting Zika, so she becomes the co-wife, as I just spoke out, the co-wife of the wife of the brother who was never in the world at the same time, because Reuven and Levi were never alive at the same time. Now Reuven's widow is the quasi-co-wife through Zika plus Maimar to Shimon's widow, so Shimon's widow wouldn't be able to be taken in Yibam by Levi. Zika. So this is caused through Zika. Zika plus Maimar. Maimar reinforces the power of Zika, as we see. Maimar, he says, no, it would be the same rule if there was no Maimar. The Maimar here didn't help. That the second widow, Shimon's own original wife, she needs a chalitza, but she can't get a yibum. Through the Zika alone, even without the Maimar, it creates a quasi-ishus for Ruvain's widow, so now Levi can't marry Shimon's original widow because she was a quasi-co-wife to Ruvain's widow. And this is mentioning Maimar. Why? Not because Maimar is needed to reinforce Zika and give it the power of quasi-marriage, but le'afuke me Beis Shammai, to exclude the opinion of Beis Shammai, to amre Maimar kona kinyan gamor. Kamashmalan, it doesn't. Beis Shammai says Maimar is so gishmak, it's not only like a rabbinical kedushin, it's kind of like a deraisa kedushin. Kamash Malan, that Maimar is not so powerful. We don't hold like Beis Shammai. Maimar is not so strongly mentioned on Shabbos. The amazing halacha in the Rambam. It's mamish the first halacha. It's the first halacha in Ishus. So turn to the beginning of Rambam in Nashim. It says, Kodem matan Torah, before the Torah, Haya Adam Pogea Isha Bashuk. They would meet in the street, maybe not the mall. Im Ratzahu Vehi, if they both agreed, Lisa to get married. Lisa saw Machliso Beito. If they agreed to get married, bring her home. Bola Beinu Lebein Atzmo V'Tielisha, and Mamish, they're married without anything else. Just go and start living together. Kevanch not na Torah. Nistavi Yisrael Sheim Yirtza Ish Lisa Isha Yigner Tatachila Bifnei Eidim Achar Kach Tielo LaIsha Shemar Kikach Isha Uvo Leha. It's a Chiddush Torah. The Rambam says Kiddushin. Getting engaged is a Jewish invention that Hashem gave us at Sinai, Matan Torah. So it's amazing. So these formalities of marriage is a mitzvah deraisa that we are commanded, and before this existed, it was just a man and a woman met and they moved in together. So in a sense, Yibum goes back to the pre-Matan Torah day, because the deraisa, the Yavam and the Yevama, they just get together and boom, the mitzvah of Yibum is done. They don't need this mamar. They don't need a kedushin first. They don't need all these formalities first. They don't need to rent a wedding hall. They can go to Vegas and elope. It's great, but this mamar is sort of to make it nice, to make it look like a real wedding. Really, this woman had a kedushin already from the first brother who passed away. So Reuven is the one who did the kedushin, and Shimon is sort of stepping into Reuven's shoes and continuing the kedushin, continuing that original relationship, and building Reuven an heir through Yibum. So we commented, we're not going to comment, but you look around, and the mainstream culture, if you can call it a culture, is sort of reverting. You see marriage rates are way down. They're not into marriage anymore. But they still live together, but without marriage. So Baruch Hashem, the Jewish people are holding on to the concept of engagement in marriage. It's a chiddush of Torah. You should appreciate what we have. But that's mamar to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says it's mamish like a marriage, and we say no. Eisive Abaye has a kasha on Rav Yehuda who says Zika is very strong. Shnei achin be'olamecha, 2 brothers that lived in the world together. One of them Nebuch died below Vlad without any children. Amad Sheni Azay Lasos Maimar. And now Shimon, the second brother, he's getting up to do mamar. He didn't do the mamar yet. He wanted to make a big party. He wanted to rent a hall and get a cake and everything. He didn't have time. Until he had another brother. So he was about to do mamar on the Shemeres Yavam. Didn't get to do it. He had another brother, Umeis. And Nebuch Shimon passed away before he could do the Yibum or the mamar. So now we had Reuven died without children. So Reuven's widow, Rachel, was going to be taken in Yibum by Shimon. Shimon was about to do the mamar, didn't get to do it, and Nebuch died. But before he died, Levi was born, a third brother. So the first woman, Rachel, the widow of Reuven, the original brother, she goes out in the sense that she is not obligated to anything from Levi. She's not Shemeres Yavam to Levi at all. Levi was never in the world with her own husband, Reuven. Shnia meaning the wife of Shimon. That Shimon had a pre-existing wife before he was going to do Mamar and Yibam with Reuven's widow, Rachel. O choletzis o mis Yevamos. She can get a chalitza or a Yibam from Levi we're talking about. If you're going to tell me there's a strong Zika, so this is Rav Huna, or this is Abaye questioning Rav Yehuda who says there's a strong Zika. If you tell me there's such a strong Zika, that it's like Kenusa, it's like they're quasi-married already, then the widow of Shimon is like the tzara, the co-wife of a woman who was never in the world, a widow who was never in the world with Levi. So how could Levi marry Shimon's own pre-existing widow, Leah, when she was a quasi-co-wife through Zika with Rachel, who was the widow of Reuven, who was never in the world together with Levi? It's a quasi-erva. They were never in the world together, as the Mishnah said, so they couldn't do it. The Zika, and the Zika is what's creating this status of Isser. Hamani Rebbe Meir he. So Rabbi Yehuda answered, no, that's a Rebbe Meir. That's a Rebbe Meir. The Amar ain't Zika. He says ain't Zika. But Rabbi Yehuda says, I would rely on the sources that say yesh Zika. There's a strong Zika. Rabbi Meir says, there's no Zika. In the sense it's a very weak Zika. It's not like Kenusa, and it wouldn't be an issue in this case for Levi to go ahead and do Yibum to Shimon's widow, Leah. Well, Misvir Leah, the Rebbe Meir ain't Zika. Does Rebbe Meir really hold there's no Zika? There's a very weak Zika. It's none, but there's a Mishnah later on. Arba Achim, there's 4 brothers. Shnai mehem nisun shtei achayos. So you have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and Reuven and Levi are married to Rachel and Leah. Beautiful. But there's a problem. Meitu hanisuyin achayos, and the 2 first brothers, Reuven and Shimon, they died without children. We say these 2 girls, Rachel and Leah, that are sisters, they need a chalitza and not a yibum. Sava, Rebbe Meir, Ein Zika. If you're going to tell me that Rebbe Meir holds Ein Zika, that the Zika bond is very weak, Hane Mitrei Batikasin, these 2 widows, Rachel and Leah, they come from 2 different houses. They come from Reuven and Shimon, respectively. Haili Abim Chada, Haili Abim Chada. Why don't we say that the surviving brothers, Levi and Yehuda, Levi should marry Rachel and Yehuda should marry Leah? It's 2 different brothers, 2 different houses. It's not a problem for 2 brothers to marry 2 sisters. We're going to see that all the time throughout Yevamos. 2 brothers used to marry 2 sisters. In small towns, these things happen. There's not a lot of choices. So yeah, if you have a good shidduch, one brother gets a good shidduch. So does she have a sister? Does she have a sister? It was a question. It was a good question. So if you're going to tell me that Rebbe Meir holds there's no Zika, so what's the problem here with the 2 surviving brothers marrying the 2 widows? One widow from each house goes to one surviving brother, no problem. Le'olam ein zika. So really, Rabbi Meir holds ein zika, like Rabbi Yehuda had told us, mishum de kasavar, but there's another reason that Rabbi Meir is cautious here. He says, asur levatal mitzvahs yivnin. He says it's asur to be mevatel the mitzvah. Now, if Levi goes ahead and does yibum on Rachel, but then Nebuch, something happens to Levi passes away, so then now Yehuda is faced with a quandary, because he has the widow of Levi, and that was Rachel, who was originally Reuven's widow, but he also has Shimon's widow, so he's got two Yevamas from two different places, but one of them has two houses on it, and he can't do anything, now he's stuck. So Rabbi Meir is worried about this. The Dilma Adamai Bimchad, Mai Sidach. He says, before one can do Yibum, one of them's going to die. So he's a little bit worried about that. And the other one is, the other widow is never going to have a Yibum. If you let one brother go ahead and do Yibum on one sister, then it's going to create an erva situation if that brother dies, and now there's two sisters facing Yehuda, the last surviving brother. So of course you could ask, they should have a joint wedding ceremony, Yibum ceremony, and they should do it exactly at the same time. Maybe that's an answer, but typically they don't do that. The Tosfos here explains that we don't usually worry people die. We have Gemaras in Kodshim. We talked about if a man sends his carbon to the base of Mikdash, if it's chatas, you can't bring it after he dies. So we assume he's still alive. You understand, there was no cell phone back then. There's no text message. He can't text and say, yeah, I'm still alive, bring the carbon. So this guy was 85 years old, L'man Hashem. He's on his last, he's in his bed, and he sends his carbon. You understand. He's trying to do kapara. He's trying to get a clean slate. He sends his carbon. It arrives a month later. We assume he's still alive. We don't worry that he died, even though he was old and sick and sending his last carbon. We don't worry that he died. So the Tosfos explains the altar dafka lo chayish. If it's kind of immediate, it's right away, we're not worried somebody dies. Zman meruba chayishin, and if it's a long time, we're worried somebody might die. Shema Yevamos. The Kulei Alma, he says, not just remember, everyone would agree to this. Something that could come out that, one of them does Yibam right away, and the other one, he wants to wait. He's, Yehuda might be a little younger. He might just wait a few years, at least a few months, a few years, and it's going to stretch out a little bit, and then you'll be faced with this possibility where it's be mevatel, the mitzvah of Yibam, according to Rabbi Meir. So you see that for a little while, we don't worry about death, but for a long time, we do worry. So it's kind of a hashkafic point that we have to focus one daf a day, get through the day, but we also have to have to take a long-term view. What am I accomplishing in life? Am I accomplishing everything Hashem put me in this world to accomplish? So we don't want to run around being scared of death. As one per customer. We all get that. But we all get Tichas HaMesim also, Baruch Hashem, but we also need to take a long-term view at the same time. Chayish L'misa in the long run. That's what Tosfos is saying on a hashkafic level about Rabbi Meir being worried about a brother dying and then being mevatel, the possibility of Yibam to the other sister. V'yein Zika, if there's no Zika, according to Rabbi Meir, Tibotel. So what's wrong with being mevatel Yibam, with creating a situation where a girl's not going to get Yibam if there's not such a big Zika? If Zika's not a big deal anyway, if the Zika bond's not so strong, let's get rid of it. Rabbi Gamliel Amar, Rabbi Gamliel says in a different case, we're going to see later, Ein Zika, he says, not only is there no Zika, mutar levatel yismas yivnim. You can create a situation that knocks out Yibam. It's not Rabbi Gamliel Amar, imena mena. If she does a miyun, gezunter hate, im lo miyana, tamchina togdil, wait until she gets older, v'teitze alazu, mishum achos isha. The other girl will go out. The case we're going to see later is there are two brothers married to two sisters. And the first sister, Rachel, she was older, and she was already a gedola, so the marriage is deraisa, but Nebuch, Rachel, and Leah were orphans. But Leah was a katana. She wasn't of maturity yet, so that second marriage is derabanan. So if Reuven, who's married to Rachel, the older girl, passes away without children, so now Rachel is the Shomer Sham. She falls to Yibam to Shimon, who's married to Leah, her sister, who's a katana. So you might have thought, wow, she's a katana, it's a marriage derabanan, it's a rabbinical marriage, her father wasn't in the picture. She could do miyun and walk out of that marriage to Shimon. So the rabbis might have thought, let's tell her to do a miyun, and then Leah will walk out of that marriage to Shimon, and Shimon can do a yibum on her sister. Both sisters are still alive, but the miyun, it uses breira, it uproots retroactively the marriage. So let's tell the katana to walk out, and then we can have a mitzvah of yibum. Rabbi Gamliel says no. He says, listen, if she wants to do a miyun, we'll let her do a miyun, and if not, let her stay. Let her stay until she grows up. Once she grows up and reaches maturity, and she chooses to continue her marriage to Shimon, it's a marriage deraisa, And since Shimon is married to the sister of the Yevama goes out to shuk with nothing. She doesn't need a chalitza, doesn't need a yibam. She goes out, she can remarry anyone she wants to, but let the little girl decide. And it's kind of ironic because we say the point of miyun is let her get a little bit older until she's mature, and then she'll choose whether to continue this dirabanan marriage or not. It's up to her if she wants to continue. And here we say she's not even mature yet, but Rabbi Gamliel says, let her choose. If she wants to stay in this situation with Shimon, her husband, let her stay. And don't try to convince her to do miyun just so her big sister can do a yibam. If she wants to stay married, let her stay married. Don't try to talk her out of it. So as Rabbi Gamliel says, you can even let the girl go. Don't try to talk her out of it and into miyun, even though it's mavatel, the mitzvah of yibam. So that's Rabbi Gamliel. Not only is there weak zika, but we don't try we are allowed to create a situation that disrupts the possibility of yibam. We let the little girl have her say. We let her stay married if she wants to stay married. Good. Amar le de Rabbi Gamliel de Rabbi Meir. Kroma says you're comparing Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Meir. They're not the same thing. Lo hachi kamrin and Rabbi Meir. This is Rabbi Meir is not saying like Rabbi Gamliel. There's no zika bichlal, and we can be mevatel mitzvah. Rabbi Meir chayish shafil is faker. Rabbi Meir is worried even to the suffix, even to the suffix that one guy's going to die and then be faced with a situation where you can't do yibam. We're going to see later. I think it's Samech Aleph that Rabbi Meir we say it's also chayish lemyuta. We've seen this in Shas maybe before. Rabbi Meir is chayish l'sfeika. He's worried about possibilities. Chayish l'miyutza. He's worried about statistical possibilities. We say later Rabbi Meir is worried that maybe one of these girls is going to be an islandess. Remember, islandess can't have children, so she's excluded from Yibam. She's not in the parsha of Yibam because she can't build the house. So a girl who can't have children is not eligible bichlal to Yibam, doesn't make an erva or anything. That Rabbi Meir is worried about that if she's younger. Between the age of 12 and 20, we say she might be a late bloomer. But then at 20, Mazel Tov, it's her bat mitzvah, she's an islandess. And this is why we said by Sarah Emenu, according to the Mizrahi, Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Because at age 100, she was like age 20, free from sin. Why age 20? Bat mitzvah is age 12, because she was islandess, according to Mizrahi. So we say that 20 is a bat mitzvah of islandess, but until then, Rabbi Meir says there's a suffix, there's a potential that she's an islandess and totally pater from Yibam, so they should wait. You see, Rabbi Meir worries about these possibilities, and the other sages do not worry so much. Rabbi Gamliel feel the vadei lo chayesh. Rabbi Gamliel is not even worried about knocking out a Yivam vadei. He says, let the little girl stay in her marriage, don't tell her to do a miyun, even though it vadai knocks out the possibility of her big sister doing the mitzvah deraisa of Yibam. Let her stay married. Dilma manda lo chayesh shavila levade lo chayesh. So we say the one who doesn't worry, he's not even worried about the vadai. That's Rabbi Gamliel. Manda chayesh, one who starts worrying, if it is fake chayesh. Rabbi Meir, when you start worrying about disrupting the mitzvah of Yibam, even for the possibility that one brother will die before the other brother can do Yibam, he's worried about that and says they both get chalitza and not Yibam in the case of the 4 brothers and the 2 sisters. Good. Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef. Ha de Rav Yehuda de Shmuel. Rav Yehuda learned that from Shmuel. Remember, after Rav Yehuda learned by Rav. After Rav died, Rav Yehuda went to learn by Shmuel. You see this all over Shas. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So where did he learn it from? From Shmuel. It's not like the Mishnah says, Yud Bey, top of Amid Beis. Shomeres Yavam Shekidish Achiv Esachaysev. A woman awaiting Yibam. And one of the brothers, there's multiple brothers in this case, but one of the brothers was Mekadesh, her sister. So now that brother for sure can't do Yibam because now he is related by marriage to her sister. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Amru Omrim Lo. We tell this man, Hamten ad shiyaseh achicha ma'aseh. Wait for the chuppah, wait for the full marriage until one of your other brothers does the Yibam. So one of the other brothers will take care of the Yevama, and you need to wait until that happens before you marry the Yevama's sister. And the Taisos here points out that's Davka if they were Kiddush after she felt Yibam. If they did Kiddushin before Yibam, it's not a problem, it's not a big deal. Lamaisa, it shouldn't be Lamaisa, but it's in Even Ezer, Kuf Nun Tes Halacha Hey. They say that Yavam also Bekrova is Gukasa. The Yavam can't marry the relatives of a woman who fell to him for Yibam. Now the Yavam, remember, is the brother. Yavam is masculine, that's the brother who has the obligation. He can't marry a close relative of the widow who has fallen to him for Yibam. And they conclude, and their ma says, don't marry anybody if there's a girl waiting for Yibam. But he says that if they're Davka Shlohaita Mishudechet, he doesn't say Mikudash, but he says if they've done Shidduchim already, if one of the brothers is in Shidduchim and he's going to get married, going to get engaged, then the Ramah would allow it to go forward if that happened before she fell to Yibam. So if before the girl fell to Yibam, to Levi, and Levi's already engaged to her sister or her aunt, whatever it is, then they could go ahead and do it. But if he got engaged after the fact, the Taisa says, then you have to wait until a different brother takes care of the Yevama, does the Yibam or Chalitza, and then he could marry her relative. Amar Shmuel, Chalach Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira. And Rabbi Yehuda says, the Chalach Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira, you see Shmuel holds there's a strong Zika. Zika Kekenusa, it's a strong connection. And therefore he's usher to go ahead and marry her relatives until this Yevama situation, the Yibam situation, is taken care of by a different brother, not by him. Amarle de'i de Rav. If it's Rav, what's the problem? Amarle kasha de Rav or the Rav. He said we have a conflict in what Rav says. Dima amarainin hu aliba de Rav. So maybe Rav said there's a strong zika, there's a weak zika, or maybe it's just a machlokis of people who heard from Rav, but we don't know clearly what Rav holds. We know clearly what Shmuel holds. Kivan de Imar Mishmei de Shmuel behedya. We know exactly what Shmuel holds. There's a strong zika. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Mishmei de Rav Kevarai. We heard conflicting reports about what Rav holds by zika. We don't say, well, we don't know what Rav holds. Let's say this is from Rav. No, we say that Rav Yehuda was saying in the name of Shmuel. Amar Rav Kahana, Amrita Lishmaita Kamei de Rav Zvid. I said your sugya over in front of Rav Zvid, in Naharda. Amar Atu Nachima Sitala. He says, you heard it like this, you learned it like this. Anabehedya Masnitin. He says, we learned it explicitly. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Shomeres Yavam Shemesa. A Shomeres Yavam, the girl awaiting, the widow who's waiting for Yibam, and she dies, Asur Be'ima. The brother can't marry her mother, Al Maksavar Yesh Zika. You see, there's a strong Zika. Aza Shmuel Ataimein, Shmuel goes after his reasoning, Da Amar Shmuel, Halacha, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira, above, that we tell the guy who got engaged after the relative fell to Yibam, listen, you can't marry the girl now, she's related to the Yevama, wait until a different brother does Yibam or Chalitza, and then go ahead with your chuppah, with your marriage. So all the Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is suicha. We have to say it. He has to tell us he holds Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and he holds Yesh Zika. Yesh Zika. If he just told us Yesh Zika, there is a strong Zika. Hava mina hani mili bechad. We'd say that's only with one brother. With one brother, there's a strong Zika because he has to do something. He has to Yibam or Chalitza. Aval betray with two brothers, with more than one brother. Lo, maybe the Zika is not so strong. Kamash Malan, we see from here, even with more than one brother, which is the case Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was talking about, we tell him you have to wait before marrying this girl's sister. Wait till a different brother does a Yibam or Chalitza, then go ahead and marry your sister. We see there's more than one brother, and there is a strong Zika according to Shmuel. So Rabbi Yehuda is citing Shmuel. Kamash Malan, Yishmein and Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. If we just said Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Havamida, we would have thought Hani Mili Mechayim. This is only when they're alive. But after the Yevama, the girl awaiting Yibam, dies, the Zika would fly off, it would be gone, and the brother could even marry her mother. Kamash Malan, the Zika bechdi lo paka. Zika doesn't go away by itself, or with the death of the Yevama. It needs a Chalitza or a Yibam, and that's when it's gone. Mishnah, beautiful. Shnei Achim, there's two brothers, and Meit Echad Mehen. One brother, Nebuch, died. V'yavam Mesheni, es Eshes Achiv. And Shimon does Yibam, marries the widow of Reuven. Achar Kach, Nolad Lehen Ach. And now Levi's born, Mazel Tov. Umeis, and then Shimon, Nebuch, dies. Harishona, the first girl who was the widow of Reuven originally, Yotza, she goes out to the shuk. She gets to marry anybody. Mishum Eshes Achiv Shalai B'mo, because now she was the wife of Reuven who had died before Levi was ever born. Hashniya, and the original wife of Shimon, she goes out Mishum Tsarosa, because she's the co-wife of the widow of Reuven, who was never in the same world with Levi. So, but Maimar Mace, if Shimon hadn't done Yibam yet, but he had at least done the Maimar. Remember, Maimar reinforces the power of Zika. Hashniya choletzes Yevamos. The first girl, Rachel, couldn't be taken Yibam because she was the widow of the brother who was never in the same world with Levi, but Levi could do Chalitza, but not Yibam, to Leah, the widow of Shimon, because he was in the same world with Shimon at the same time. But she has this tzara staz, quasi tzara staz through Zika, as explained in Amud Aleph. Rabbi Shimon Omer, get ready, miyabam la'ezim and sheyirtze, that Levi could do Yibam on either Rachel or Leah. Or chalitza on either girl. Now we're going to spend the next part examining, wow, that's a tremendous kula from Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Oshaya, Halakei Rabbi Shimon Af Rishona. He says Rabbi Shimon disagrees even in the Rishona. That's referring to the Mishnah on Yud Zayin. Mishnah on Yud Zayin, the third brother Levi was born after they fell to Yibam, but before anything happened. before there was Yibam or a Maimar. Mimai, how do you know? B'dikatani Mishnah Yaseira. It teaches an extra Mishnah. These two Mishnayos, the one on Yud Zayin and the one right here, they're extra. But Bava Dereisha, Lamankatani, the first Mishnah on Yud Zayin, who are you going to teach that for? Ilay Mala Rabbanan. If you're teaching that to show you the power of the Rabbanan always hold the third brother, Levi, is usher to do anything to the widow of Ruvain, and it's an erva, it's Saras erva. So if you say that's Rabbanan Hashta Yibum L'Sof Nolad, so if you say that that's for the Rabbanan, well, we have the case right here where there was Yibum first, and then Levi was born, Deki Ashkacha. Then when Levi's born, he finds her Beheter Ashkacha as a mutter woman, as not as Reuven's widow, but as Shimon's wife. Asri Rabbanan, the rabbis say that's Asr. So the first case, which was Nolad, that Levi was born, Achakach Yavam, and then after Levi's born, Shimon does Yibam B'bayi. Would the rabbis even be able to permit there? Of course not. Elalav Rabbi Shimon. So that first Mishnah was taught to show you the power of Rabbi Shimon's heter. It's trich. V'tana Reisha lo diachako with Rabbi Shimon. V'tana Seva lo diachako with the Rabbanan. So that first case teaches you even when Levi was born, before Shimon did Yibam or Maimar on Reuven's widow, Rabbi Shimon still allows Levi to later on take Rachel, Reuven's widow, as in Yibam. Rabbi Shimon should have disagreed over there also. Ela, this is what Rabbi Shimon did. Not he waited for the rabbis until they finished all of their arguments and all their teachings. And then he disagreed with them. And Rashi says he disagreed on both cases, but he waited for them to finish. This is kind of like how Beis Hillel used to teach Beis Shammai first and then disagree. So this is what Rabbi Shimon was kind of learned from that. Rabbi Shimon says, listen, you finish teaching, and then I'm going to disagree. I'm going to argue on both cases and say that Levi, the third brother, could go ahead and do Yibam in both cases to Rachel, because when he finds her as the wife of Shimon, not as the widow of Reuven. So if Rabbi Shimon is so incredibly makel that Levi can do a Yibam on Rachel, even though Rachel was originally the widow of Reuven, because Levi found her as the wife of Shimon, how do you really find this Eishes Achiv Shalaylamu, this Isser of doing Yibam because she was the wife of a brother who was never in the same world at the same time? These brothers were never together. Bechad, so the Gemara says, Bechad, there was only one brother. There was one brother in that generation, Chad Acha, Umis, and he died without children. And then after that, Nolad Lo Ach. So Reuven Nebuch died without children, and now he has a widow. And then later on, Levi's born. Shimon's born. Someone else is born. So that would be that'd be impossible. Inami betray. Or there's two brothers. Lo Yavam Lo Mis. He didn't do Yibam. He didn't die. He's just waiting around. Bishlama Yavam Achakach Nolad. So it's fine if he did Yibam and then afterwards Levi was born. He finds her as the wife of Shimon, not as the widow of Reuven. Ela Nolad Achakach Yavam. If he's born and then there was a Yibam, when he was born, she was the widow of Reuven still. My time, because over Yesh Zika can do Damya. We see, according to Rabbi Shimon, not only is there a Zika, but the Zika is strong. The Zika is strong in Rabbi Shimon, and he holds it's like Kenusa. It's as if they're already married. So even though they haven't done the Yibam yet, the widow of Reuven, Rachel, through Zika, through the power of Zika, is as if she's married to Shimon. So now when Levi's born, even though Shimon hasn't done Yibam yet on Rachel, it's as if they're married. So Levi, when he's born, sees Rachel not as a widow of Reuven, but as a wife through Zika of Shimon. And then if Nebuch Shimon passes away, Levi is allowed to take her. We're going to hold it there because we're going to have a lot of shilas in Rabbi Shimon and his shita, and it's going to be a big one going over to the next Amud. Shkoyach Rabosai, be well. And remember, your chameleon is a zikit, Zika.